Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. And if you're looking for candid conversations on arts and culture, you found the right place. Please consider subscribing and sharing. Today's guest is a Baltimore-based illustrator, storyteller, and creative problem solver. We have some things in common. Please welcome Yifan Luo. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Rob. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Likewise, I'm excited to have you on. One, you know, your image that you have is your background image on here, and in various other places, it's like that is a logo that needs to be on a shirt. That is fire.
Thank you.
So, you know, before we get too deep and immersed in this quicksand of a conversation, could you share your story? Give us those vital stats, those details. What is the Yifan Luo story?
Sure. I feel like that's a very broad question, but I would say, you know, it's still being written. So you're witnessing that right now. But yeah, maybe it would be helpful for me to talk a little bit about where I am now, and then we can peel back the layers a bit, and I can give you some info about my background. But as you said, I'm an illustrator, visual storyteller in Baltimore. I'm also an educator. I moved here a few years ago to attend Micah's illustration practice MFA program. And I now also teach there part-time as an adjunct in the illustration department, which I absolutely love, while building out my practice as a full-time freelance artist. And, you know, we were talking a little bit about names and origins and like cultural things prior to the start of the podcast. And so to give insight on my background, my family is Chinese. I was actually born in Chengdu, not Chengdu province, Sichuan province. Chengdu is the city. And in the late 80s, you know, during a lot of significant cultural shifts and happenings, and my parents moved us to Belgium at a pretty young age. And I spent many of my formative years there until I was about 9 years old, and then moved to the US and have been kind of bouncing around in different places since. So, you know, eventually making my way over to Charm City. And yeah, I think this shifting around during my early years has really inevitably affected, you know, how I move through the world in a figurative way. You know, literal as well, I guess. But I think it's made me into a very adaptable person. And I think I've always just been very curious by nature. But now I'm curious, but also very interested in connecting to people from different walks of life and engaging with the communities I'm in, but also maybe understanding more about different worldviews by connecting with individuals. And so you'll see a lot of that come up in my work. There's a lot of you know, documentation and observation, lots of stuff based on current events and interviewing others, and just reflections on shared and personal identity, because I also feel like as someone who moved around a lot at a young age, I have this interesting, it's like simultaneously feeling connected culturally to a lot of different places while not, you know, fully feeling like I can quote unquote own any of those places in comparison to somebody who may have grown up there their whole lives. So yeah, but that's sort of the nutshell background, and a little bit about how that ties into the work I'm interested in doing now as an illustrator.
Thank you. So I want to ask about like some art making, some storytelling questions. So these next two are kind of going to fall into, well, next few are going to fall into that vein, and then they're going to get progressively weirder as in the latter half, as you're very aware of. So could you share maybe your first art making experience, or one of those things where it may be either the experience or the first time where you're like, no, art is cool. That's something I want to dive into. Like, I think for me, when I was younger, and I've mentioned this on this podcast a few times, that I wanted to go into illustration, to go into comics and things of that nature. And it was one of those things where my parents, it was a Christmas, they were like, yeah, here's this, I forget whose book was. It may have been Eric Larson's, like How to Draw Comic Characters. And it was just like, here's some color pencils, have at it. You know, it may have been a thing to preoccupy me because I was a kid that asked a lot of questions, which translated into me doing a podcast. Who knows? So what was your first experience with making art, or your first experience when you're like, yeah, art is something I'm interested in. That captures my attention.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've known a lot of wonderful artists who both either remember doing it their whole lives, or maybe picked it up more intentionally a little bit later on. And I'm definitely somebody who gives a lot of my earliest memories involve some sort of art making, but it wouldn't necessarily fall under this umbrella, as is true for many kids, where I thought of it consciously as like, this is art and this is a craft. It was really more just about playing and experimenting. And I think for me, it really came from this love of kind of making up stories in my head. And I would draw compulsively like these recurring characters and scenarios, especially in like the margins of my dad was a grad student when I was a kid, and so just like a lot of his old papers were lying around, and they sort of became like unofficial sketchbook, because there's something, I think I say this to a lot of my students now, and believe this in my general practice, but there's something I think a little less precious about drawing on a sheet of paper that already has some stuff on it. So yeah, I just remember doing a lot of those doodles and having, again, these recurring worlds in my head. And so I draw different characters, sort of experiencing different life events. And sometimes it was a way of me, for me to process what I was going through as a kid. And I mean, it seems like you and I are probably around the same generation. I didn't grow up with the internet, or we didn't have cable. So it was really a way to self-entertain and really just kind of get lost in my own world. And then I also loved reading stories and being read to as a kid. And I feel like in a way that was sort of exposure to a lot of illustrated mediums. I had this great children's book that it was like a compilation of French stories, and there was one for every single day of the year. So you could like go to the day and like have a little thing. And so I would have my dad read from that. And I read a lot of comics as a kid, a lot of Grimm's fairy tales. So just really consuming those stories, and then sometimes, translating that, like or remixing it into some sort of drawn form. But yeah, again, I think, the idea of like illustration or doing this as something beyond just my own entertainment wasn't something that really came about until a little bit later in life. And I still actually remember being really young, like maybe 4 or 5, and going to this event. And there was a famous, I think a colorist or something from a comic that I used to read. And he was like signing autographs and drawing like little doodles inside of people's comic books. And I remember thinking at the time, like, wow, they actually have someone manually draw out comics. Like I thought like the idea of like printing something was like not even, I don't think had entered my mind, but I think that was like the first time I made the connection that there's like a human behind this who's actually like creating this. And, the details are a little blurry. I thought maybe he was like literally drawing out every single comic out in the world, but it was, I think the first time I realized like people actually do this for a living. This is cool.
It's one of those things for me, like super young before, I remember I used to draw the X-Men. That was the thing that I would draw, and I would hurry up, go through my tests, get my B, knew that I could just mid-tier it, just get a B, so I could spend the rest of the time drawing Wolverine and then selling it to other students, because that's what I would.
A little side hustle going. You're entrepreneur from the get-go. Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. And also, it was funny. You mentioned the book with the stories by the different days. This is a certain degree of ego I have. Like I really like my birth date. It's January 20th. So I have this one book, The Daily Laws. And the first thing I did was, of course, go to what is the daily law for my. So I would treat it like a horoscope. So if I ever find that book, I'm going to look at it the same way. Like, what is the story?
Right. I think the story for my birthday was something like really short and kind of lame, and it made me a little bit annoyed at the time. But it's like, yeah, I think especially, I don't know, when you're young too, it's like all these extra dates, like you don't have as much maybe significant association with other dates yet, and so it's like everything is like hyper birthday, on a pedestal. You
start looking at it and it's like, why is my date the one that sucks? Why does my story have the mid,
I guess just you existing, Rob, is just outshining all the other laws and random factoids. So that's what we'll pin it on.
As I've read the etymology of it, Robert is bright and famous. So for those who don't get it, this explains a lot. Yes. as I wax philosophy with my hand, saying, yes, more. Yeah. So talk about, if you will, because storyteller, that's the thing that's interesting to me, because that's you're in my lane now. No.
Yeah, true.
What are, in your opinion, what are the most important elements of good storytelling?
Yeah. Well, first off, there's room for all of this in the lane, I think. But
No.
it's interesting. Yeah, Roberts is taking over here. But I think there's this is a joke from earlier about, pronunciation of your name. But I think it's a tricky question, because I think, when we think of storytelling, maybe like the traditional sense is like, there's all these different elements working together, and with a really good story, maybe as a consumer, you're not necessarily picking those apart, and it just works, right? Yeah. And I think for me, I think of myself as a storyteller in part because, as maybe you got the sense from me talking about my childhood, a lot of my exposure to illustration and sort of the things that I really enjoy about it are sort of an extension of this need to tell stories or capture words and turn it into something authentic. And maybe it sounds a little trite, but I think, if you were to really whittle down to the most important element of a good story, I would say that personally, it's important to have a really strong voice that you resonate with. And that's both, a voice that people feel moved by or feel a connection to, but also an engaging way of telling it. And I think there's those people out there that you could listen to for hours, even if they're not really talking about something with a distinct plot or conflict, et cetera. And I think especially when you think about the illustration world, there's many different types of storytelling. Like by nature, illustrations are, it's not art just for the sake of art. It's really to help illuminate or explain like a concept or idea or story. And so sometimes an individual panel or even a wordless image can be a story in and of itself. And the ones I'm really drawn to are the ones that do have that, you can tell they're really trying to communicate something authentic, even if it might not be like fashionable or marketable, and they're doing it in a way that really helps put you in their shoes. So I think Leanna Fink is the name of an artist who does a really great job with this, because she has a really minimal kind of scribbly style. I think she became a mother in the last year or two, and so has just been sharing a lot of these little snippets from her daily life. And, to the average person, it just looks like a kind of a scribbled doodle, but the use of words and the specific scenario and like the rawness of it just feels so appealing. And I think, she's very successful for a reason. Eleanor Davis is another person who does a really good job with this, because she always sets a very specific mood. It's like, maybe it takes place in her specific town with her family. Like, it's super individual to her, but she really creates this world that makes you feel like you're there with her and able to sort of empathize and experience what she's going through.
Sure.
And I think that, again, all leads to that strong, authentic voice.
That's really cool. And I think it connects to what this next question is. I think there's obviously some overlap here.
Yeah.
So the work focusing on visual journalism, portraiture, editorial, food, and travel illustration, and I love shelf awareness, by the way. I do get I do get some of the installments of the nib. I have like 3 or 4 of them in here.
Oh, awesome.
In the studio. So yeah, shout out to you on that. What is it about that intersection that really kind of like resonates with you? Like being able to like share these stories, these sorts of like ideas in this format, because I would imagine that might be a way of getting across an idea in a slightly different way. Like, for instance, if I were to say this, that's going to resonate in one way. But if I were to draw this, it resonates in another way. Or even this, it's a cartoon, the whole Family Guy thing, right? I would notice that some of these heavier topics that kind of come up, they wouldn't have the adults say it. They would have like the dog and the kids say it because it's not something that's feasible. So someone can even extrapolate that. So speak to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think, first off, illustrations and illustrated narratives are really powerful tools in general for communication. I agree with you that sometimes it can really help give a different perspective or make a difficult topic a little easier to navigate. And I mean, I think part of it is just our brains are wired to be really attracted to images. And so having illustrations involved automatically, I think sometimes makes something feel more accessible or lowers that barrier, of access. And I think it also can really just immediately make something, simplify something or add maybe a buffer between these harsh words and then, your interpretation. But illustrations are by nature subjective because, somebody is making them. And so that can be a danger that you might run into. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind that I think they do really enhance a story and, a piece of writing, but it can sometimes be dangerous. But for the same reason, like if you think about a story where you have a photo of a person versus their illustration, that can be powerful on many levels because that, however that artist is choosing to interpret the person may really make you feel something about them that may not explicitly be stated in the piece.
Sure.
Like if you're thinking about, I'm just thinking about this because they unveiled the portraits of like Michelle Obama and Barack Obama for the White House recently, and just thinking about, how is that president captured? I think there was a lot of talk about like Michelle is wearing this like strapless, her shoulders are out, and it's a lot different than some of the clothing that maybe past first wives have worn, and that really says something about like the influence she's had in those areas mm-hmm. and like her power. And yeah, I feel like I'm kind of going on a tangent, but I think with visual journalism specifically, which is sort of what we're touching on with pieces like Shelf Awareness and some of these other illustrated narratives, I think, journalism at its best, you're trying to preserve like a specific time and place. And hopefully in doing so, you're gaining a deeper understanding of the different viewpoints and circumstances, especially of like the communities that you're reporting on and like sure. marginalized communities or marginalized voices specifically. And I think the root of like visual journalism is very similar. We're really trying to, I sometimes call it memory collecting, like really observing and listening and learning from your community, and then taking that, adding your own, obviously, viewpoint to it and creating something that will hopefully connect with other people in a way that written text alone couldn't do.
So this is a version of journalism. I think that doesn't get captured in a way that people have this rigid idea of what is art. So like a lack of vision. What is art? What is journalism? What are these different things? And I agree with you that this notion of this is journalism. This is journalism, or this is art. I think let's open that out a little bit more, because as the world has shifted and as more people are getting these opportunities, we're stretching what the boundaries of all of these things are. And the way that you described it of like, it's kind of in paraphrasing, but it's kind of documenting what's happening through, whether it's through conversation, whether it's through visuals. Right. And even going back to the thing that you were touching on about the Obama's portraits, absolutely. That message is in there. It's like, oh no, this is going to be a lot different. Even I look at, what is it, the Kende Wally, and I'm always blanking on the previous portraits that they had. And there was a certain degree of vibrancy and color that was there, and it kind of pops. And each iteration of it has popped in comparison to previous presidents. Because it's like, no, these folks in previous presidents and first ladies, these folks are going to like jump off the page. Amy Sherman, I was thinking of. These folks are going to pop off the page and off the canvas. Yeah,
for sure. I might have said first. I don't know if I said first lady first. I think I might have said something weird, but you got what I meant.
Absolutely. We're doing it here. We're doing it. So I think that we're an amalgam, I like using that word, of what we like and what we choose to incorporate into our lives. For instance, I like wrestling and pop culture. There are references all the time. My partner, I know she gives me crap because I always find a way to work RoboCop into a conversation, or Predator or SWAT Cats. She's like, geez, can you just be an adult for 2 minutes? No, why would I do that? Who wants to do that? So describe something that isn't quote unquote art related, but that is
Mm-hmm.
something that plays a role in your work, whether it's in influences, whether it's in, look, I got to have this stuffed animal right here. This is really about me. This is what I do. This is how I get my work done. So tell me about that.
Yeah. I think maybe the first like obvious thing that comes to mind. And also, I love pop culture as well. So I'm like, life's too short to be serious all the time. So I support your RoboCop references. But yeah, I think the things that sort of anchors me that's like kind of outside of, you know, what you might consider like a creative practice is that I'm definitely like a fitness buff. And it's a very regular part of my life and has been for a long time. I definitely credit my parents for both being pretty active and kind of encouraging that from a young age. So, yeah, and I did a lot of different exercise programs. I was really into triathlons at some point and worked as a fitness instructor for many years. So people who've known me for a while kind of know that about me. But nowadays I do mostly like CrossFit, Olympic lifting and running. And, you know, it's like all the obvious reasons, like the endorphin boost, like I think it really sets the tone for the rest of the day for me, or gives me something to look forward to. There's a lot of like functional benefits, but I also love the community aspect of it and the way that it helps sort of anchor you in a routine. It helps you set measurable goals that I think and kind of encourages you in a way that you can translate to other aspects of your personal or professional life, and kind of fuels that competitive drive, I think, in a healthy way, because, you know, you don't want to take that out on like your partner or maybe like your creativity, because that can be maybe a harder thing to measure or assess. And, you know, that's not really the viewpoint that I want to have when it comes to like illustrations. And so, yeah, I think that's a big thing for me. And then I'm also just really interested in trying to, you know, tread lightly for my time on this planet, and interested in sustainability and ways to, I guess, live a more sustainable life, and think about different initiatives, especially within the Baltimore community, where I can help kind of create, you know, tools for people who are looking for those types of things in their lives as well. So I guess that's something that's maybe a little bit easier to directly relate to my work, because I have done some resources for the city of Baltimore relating to like composting and just, you know, community gardens and things of that nature. But I think it can be an overwhelming topic, because you always think about like the big corps that are having a huge impact and what can you really do as an individual. But I think there is power in trying to still create resources for people who want to take action, because like every little action I think matters. So yeah.
That's true. 100%. It's awesome. I go back to the one thing about, you know, having that kind of rush, to kind of pop. Like I do the gym. I was out for like maybe about a week, and I went back today, and it's like I noticed the shift from going versus not going, and I'm going pretty regularly, and I was like, oh, I'm so exhausted, I'm so tired. And today I was like, I got so much energy, man. Let's do it. Let's kill everything. Let's murder everything. But but you don't want to have that thing, and it's a running bit that I have. I forget which movie it was in, but it may have been like Forrest Gump. I'm not quite sure, but it was something that was just ridiculous, where it was, you know, something, you know, handsy physically that happened in it. And I just remember the guy's response was, "This is damn Wars Johnson." It's just like, what? Like you're being terrible, and you're not putting that energy or what have you in the right place. And that's immediately what I thought of when you were saying, you know, possibly taking it out on your partner, what have you. I can see it now. Like, it's these damn grants. It's this grant writing. It's these podcasts.
Yeah. And I mean, it can be hard in the moment too, to even realize like what you're doing or how you're reacting to something. Sometimes it's like, this grant like is actually what's bothering me. Or it could be, you know, my hormones are acting up right now. Or maybe I've been sitting around my computer for too long. So like anything remotely irritating is going to trigger me.
just screaming. And yeah, it's not I take up a lot of space. I'll just put it that way. So I got one more real question for you before I get into those rapid fire questions. So when you're preparing to work, how tidy is your workspace? And describe it, because, you know, I'm very interested. Like, mine looks stupid right now. I have a Topo Chico bandana here for some reason. I'm not joking. You can't see it. It's a Topo Chico bandana.
Just
and
manifested.
I got a bottle of tequila next to me. It's a very weird setup, and this is the creative space, and everything that I kind of need is like at a hands. But if someone came over, they're like, your place is not in disarray. So how tidy is your workspace? Like, tell me about that. Describe your workspace.
Sure. So I'm, very fortunate that I have this whole kind of little studio nook in my home. It's like the very top floor of a row home, so it gets pretty steamy in here on summer days. But it's a really nice, like it's probably the best lighting of the whole house. I've got a lot of plants around me. Hopefully, that good juju of being around green. And then, yeah, it's kind of, I really like working at a higher desk for some reason. I sit and stand all the time. And so I have like a high chair and just like keep the desk at kind of a standing height. And then one of those like, I don't even, portable drawing surfaces that you can sort of lean back. Yeah. I'm using my hands, but it's like no one is going to see it. So try to describe it as best as I can.
Let's describe it really well. So yes. Yifan is using her. It's like, I'm doing the same thing.
Doing random motions. But yes, it's like a sort of retractable little wooden thing that goes on top, that because it's nice sometimes drawing at an angle. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people keep kind of the computer stuff separate from like the analog stuff, which I think also has a lot of value, but I do, I use a lot of like references and things like that. So I do have like a laptop with a double monitor setup kind of next to that, so I can use it if I need to, but also sort of have it be on the other side of this like long table that I work on. And yeah, generally, and I try to, kind of fill the walls. You can't really see behind me, but in front, there's a ton of just different images from other artists that inspire me or friends, like a lot of little postcards and random little knickknacks that are just visually inspiring and fun to look at if I just need a break from what I'm doing. And a lot of books and things around. And yeah, I feel like it's never quite as neat as I would like it to be, but then every once in a while, like maybe like once a month, I'll just get this cleaning frenzy and I'll take half an hour and like tidy everything up, and it feels amazing. And I inevitably find like 10 pens that are no longer working that probably need to be retired and things like that. But I think we're always like maybe harder on ourselves because like how we like things. But whenever people come over, they're like, wow, it looks pretty neat. And I'm like, oh no, but don't look in that corner. Yeah, so it's a pretty functional space overall, but it's interesting because, when you let the mess kind of gather, it's almost like you're excavating. You can like see the stack of books that you've been referencing the last month. And you're like, oh, okay, I can tell this has been here a while because I was like looking through that, X weeks ago. And so that's usually a good reminder of like, yeah, it might be time to reset the space a little bit. But I think all that is to say, I can definitely work under some sort of semi-organized chaos, but ideally it would be a little bit neater. And I wouldn't leave so many things out, but they're almost always there as like a reminder of like, you still need to do this, or like this thing is not quite resolved, so keep it within arm's reach.
Yeah. Yeah. And I brought down my background screen so you can just see like my wall and all of my. Yours is much better, much better than mine's. But I have just different things that matter to me, like right behind me, over my. I guess this is my this shoulder right here. That's like my creative altar, and I have two of them in here. So just of different things that I've gotten. That's a paper cut from Rosa Left right there, and just different things that I've gotten in doing this podcast. And I think
are those like figurines? I'm seeing something, but it's a little blurry in the corner. Like it looks like Baby Groot or some sort of. I don't know. That
is Leonardo from the Ninja Turtles as a Funko Pop.
Oh, yes. Okay, that's all. I just see kind of like a green and brownish blob.
Yeah. And then there's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters, bringing in the rear. So yeah, just, having those things that, if I have a studio, and this is my studio, it's like having those things that are interesting, that bring me joy, and you can't see it, but in the front of me is the paintings that I did or have a couple years back. And those are like right there. So it's almost like the way that I have everything positioned. The work is happening here. The fun is happening behind me. Yeah. And and I just remember really kind of changing that setup for the Best of Baltimore shoot. I was
Mm,
like, all right, someone's coming over here. This is going to be in a magazine. I need to
yeah.
sort this out.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny too, because now I think, especially with Zoom, you're more conscious about like what's behind you. And in a way, I kind of feel like, oh, maybe I need to add more stuff back there because it feels very drab when I'm on the screen, but then I can't like look at it all the time because it's not in front of me. So it's sort of, different types of considerations once you're if you're using your space for multiple functions. But yeah, ultimately, I guess you have to prioritize what works for you on a day-to-day basis.
100%. That's why your books are like right there. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's like, here's my references. So with that, I think that's a good spot for us to stop with the real questions and now get to the fun questions.
Okay. Sounds good.
All of it's fun. All of it's fun. So
I agree.
I want to start off by asking you about the Baltimore question. Name one way that Baltimore has influenced your style, whether it's creatively, professionally, or personally.
Yeah. I think I was really, it is like a very creative city in general. I think a lot of people kind of are self-made or just really invested in the community. And so there's so many artists I've been exposed to and like murals even that I've seen walking around that I think I was not seeing. I used to live in Silicon Valley right before moving here, just like a much more sort of manicured, like less vibrant town. And so I think just being around all this making and then seeing different ways that people, you know, express themselves creatively in their lives has influenced me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think just every city, it's like different sets of issues or things that they're working on. And just through people that I've met, I mentioned the compost project, like just various different little projects like that have really caught my attention that I feel like has been a good way to tap into something very real and very local that also connects to my larger interests. And so I think especially during COVID, just trying to find those little connections and collaborating with other people who are also, stuck at home, like trying to figure out how to put their work out there and make the world a little bit less depressing was a big impact for sure.
Okay, I'm going to make it weird. I'm just going to make it a weird question. If you had a mascot, what would it be?
Oh my goodness, a mascot. Okay. Well, I feel like, thinking to like inside jokes with different friends and my partner, and there's sometimes we like give each other like animal personas, and one that I've gotten a few times, and yeah, I'm leaning into the weirdness, is like either Yoshi from Mario or
Nice.
like an otter, because I think just like some of my mannerisms and always like kind of leaning back with a little piece of fruit in my mouth, so it would probably be like some sort of fun, cozy animal, kind of in the style of like a Taiwanese like mascot. I think Taiwan and Japan do a great job with those kinds of mascots. So like very blocky, very like goofy. Carrying fruit and veggies around because I feel like I obviously eat more than that, but that's sort of the food people always associate with me, like whether they're coming over or just like watching me in the wild, like whipping out random snacks. And then, I have pink hair. So maybe this character currently have pink hair. Maybe the character would have like a weird wig on. So that's a good starting point for a personal mascot, I would say.
No, that works. That works. My partner, she has pink hair as well. And she looks like a Bratz doll. It's like I'm 6'4", she's probably 5'2". So you can imagine seeing that combination.
You're a memorable looking couple, yeah.
It's like an ogre and a Bratz doll walking together. It's great. I think hers would have like fairy wings because that's just what it is.
It's magic.
Nice. Yeah, this is so. I got two more. And let's see. This one, I think this one's going to be a quick one. Favorite color that like you use in your work, and what does that color represent to you? I think colors matter. Obviously, words matter. Colors matter. For me, it's gray and ox blood. The blood of my enemies. Because I have so many enemies.
Oh man, I better watch out. Don't get on your bad side. It's so funny because I think like favorite color personally changes a lot. If I look through my work, I see a lot of colors that I maybe it's just like different phases, but I've been finding that this like really kind of matte pinkish color has been coming up a lot. It's sort of mixed with maybe like a mustardy yellow. I don't know if there's a specific association with that because I'm seeing it maybe more in my just personal work or sketchbook. But I think the pink, it's bringing me joy right now, evidently with the hair and everything. And it's just kind of a nice backdrop sometimes for maybe more serious or observational topics. So it sort of adds this, suspension of disbelief or whatever. And then that mustardy kind of like yellowy color. I think I love food illustration and doodles and drawing people. So maybe it's sort of amalgamation. There's that word again of, food and skin. And so maybe it's just, a nice representation of a lot of the topics that I'm currently really excited by.
Cool. This is the last one. This is the most odd one, but I think it's funny. We often can present kind of what we do, tell people what we do, how we do it, and all of that. And we use these great words and have this great, blah, blah, the diaspora of East Baltimore is what I use. I do that to troll. And I like to describe, I like to be able to describe what I do, but doing it badly. I just talk about stuff. That's not even nowhere near what I do. So can you describe what you do, but poorly? Like describe it badly.
Oh, interesting. I mean,
it's a challenge, I know.
The simplest would be I have an existential crisis every day and then draw something and get paid for it.
Okay. That's really
that's one part. There's also the education part, but basically, I lean on this idea of a visual, that's even too much. Maybe just I draw fun things and talk a lot, just to people like you who hopefully are here voluntarily, and to students who knows what their intentions are, but they all work very hard. Actually, I love them. I think the stumbling and all that, just word vomit is a big, that's all a part of the saying it badly. But hopefully that conveys the vibe we're going for with this rapid fire.
No, that's great. You really got me. It's like, just existential crisis. Just here we go.
Where's the lie? Okay.
It might be this thing where it's like I try to make myself seem more interesting by talking to more interesting people. That actually might be what I do.
Oh, that's a really, see that thing. I feel like that's like, it's not a bad way of saying it. It's just like like the maybe, if you were to really peel back all the layers to the onion, that would be like at the center, like actually.
I'm Austin Kleon in it a little bit. It's cool. It's cool.
I love him.
Absolutely. So with that being said, I want to thank and express my gratitude for you being on this podcast. And I want to invite and encourage you to tell the fine folks where to check out your work, where to follow you on Instagram, social media, all of that good stuff. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you again for having me. I always really enjoy your conversations, and it's, the folks listening to this can't see it, but seeing you and then hearing the voice that I'm familiar with it's like really trippy, because I'm like, that's, it's like this, anyway, magnificent being. And now you're here in real life. But I would say the best way to check out my work is my website, just my first name, last name.com, or on Instagram, it's Yifan Luo art. All together, no space or anything, on Instagram. And I try to post, slightly more off the cuff things on there. Whereas the website is slightly more curated. So those are always great places. And I check my messages. I love to, like I said, engage with folks and interview folks and make work around different people. So love to hear from folks, and that's about it.
Yeah, this is great. I'm surprised that you didn't have that same experience you had when you were younger with like, oh, this person draws all of the comics. This podcaster does all of the podcasts. That would be great.
Yeah. You're like, I do a lot though. I'm not gonna, you definitely do a lot. I'm always very impressed by like just the output.
Well, thank you.
And your calendar is like, you're booked up. You're a busy guy.
I don't know why. But with that, I want to again thank you for coming onto the podcast. And I'm Rob Lee for Yifan Luo. I'm Rob Lee saying that there is arts and culture and community in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for it.